Hello, and welcome to Wallace's Mysteries of Antiquity. Subscribe to this series to join me in exploring the enigmas of our distant ancestors and try to come to tentative conclusions about them. The Meidum Pyramid is one of the hardest to discuss, as we know a lot about its structure but very little about its history. We aren't even completely sure who built it. It's apparent through context clues that Snefru was involved in its construction, but no one is sure if that means that he built the whole thing or merely finished or reappropriated an older monument. So before we even get to talk about the structure, we need some background on the rulers. Pharaoh Huni was the last pharaoh of the Third Dynasty. We're not completely clear on his relationship with Snefru, but we're almost certain that Huni was the father of Hetepphres, Snefru's wife. Her name literally means God's daughter of his body. It's possible that he was also Snefru's father. It was not uncommon for pharaohs to marry half-sisters, making the succession from 3rd to 4th dynasty a little clearer. While Huni's name is nowhere at Meidum, some have theorized he was buried at Mastaba 17. However, in my opinion, I think the layer pyramid to be his most likely burial location, as it was very clear halfway point between the stepped mastaba of Djoser and the layered pyramid of Meidum. The layer pyramid is usually associated with Pharaoh Kaba. The problem is the Third Dynasty is so poorly understood we don't know much about Kaba. He was said to have ruled for 24 years between the rules of Sanakht and Huni. This is a problem because there was only a 6-year gap between them. Huni also ruled for 24 years. The unlikelihood of both rulers had the exact same reign, and that Kaba's reign doesn't fit with the rest of the known Third Dynasty chronology, I think it's most likely that Kaba and Huni were mixed up by later Egyptians. They may have been a Kaba with a short reign in those 6 years, but most of what I believe was mistakenly attributed to him was actually done by Huni. Like I said, there's never been any mention of Huni found at the Meidum region, although unlike the bent and red pyramids, which have Snefru's name written all over them, no contemporary cartouche of Snefru has ever been found on this pyramid either. All mentions of Snefru at this location came from later Egyptians, though the worker's mark strongly implies Snefru. The earliest mention of Snefru in association with Meidum comes from the 6th dynasty, which was this cartouche found by Flinders Petrie in the temple. The thing that really ties Snefru to this place is not his cartouche, though, but his associates. Nefermet, Rohotep, and Ranefer were all known officials to serve Snefru, and were found in various mastabas in Meidum. This is the strongest evidence that this was Snefru's project. Nefermet and Atet were found in Mastaba 16, shown here. It has been concluded that Nefermet was likely Snefru's son, who died sometime around the age of 40. But again, this is speculation, and plenty of Egyptologists believe that Nefermet was Huni's son. I do need to address something. In my Red Pyramid video, I'd neglected to mention a mummified male found in the burial chamber, which some think may have been Snefru. I had heard of this, and had entirely rejected it, but I should have at least mentioned it and explained why I was so confident that it was irrelevant. First, I am fairly certain I've read carbon dating put the mummy in the New Kingdom, but I had rejected it even before that because the timeline would not have made sense. The mummy was of a man somewhere between the ages of 30 and 40. If Huni had a 24-year reign, Snefru would likely have been close to or over 30 by the time he became pharaoh. The Red Pyramid, where the mummy was found, didn't even have its foundation laid until Snefru's 30th year as king. He then ruled for 18 more. Snefru was probably in his 70s or even his 80s by the time he died, so a 35-year-old could not have been him. These ranges are figured out by Egyptologists by looking at dates written on stones by workers. Dates in ancient Egypt were reset for each pharaoh and written relative to the coronation of a new king in 2-year cattle census cycles. How do we know that Snefru ruled for 48 years? Because we have stones from projects that we know he built saying they were put in place during the 24th cycle. Since there have never been any blocks found saying 25, we can assume he died before that. What would have been the 25th cycle of Snefru would become to the Egyptians the first cycle of Khufu. Strangely, the dates found on the blocks within the Meidum pyramid all come from between the 7th and 23rd census count, which indicates it was being tinkered with for almost Snefru's entire reign, even while the bent pyramid was being constructed and completed. Before we venture inside, I've never heard a good explanation for exactly what we are looking at with this strange structure. What is the central tower, and why are there bands of smooth and coarse stone, and what are all these holes? The pyramid was constructed in 3 distinct building phases, known as E1, E2, and E3. The first was a 7-step pyramid. The second added a single step as sort of a casing around the existing structure, and the last was smooth. Inside, there is a core with several layers wrapped around it, each step being its own layer. Here you can see where 2 layers are separated by their casing stones. The base of E3, the smooth part, is actually about 2 meters higher than the base of the other layers. While E1 and 2 are resting firmly on the bedrock, the smooth part is resting on the sand, which in my opinion is likely what caused its collapse. While you may be imagining that they leveled the bedrock in order to build the pyramid, the bedrock is actually cut at an angle to allow the pyramid to lean on itself, which further strengthened it. Only E3 was not laid in this way. It used flat courses like the Red Pyramid. Most of the iconic tower we see today is E2, though these thin bands show E1. You can tell the difference between E1 was never dressed smooth and E2 that was. The biggest part of the tower you see is band number 5, though you can see bands 4 and 3 in the 2 upper sections. Here is a diagram of what once was there versus what we see today. Hopefully this will help explain exactly what those strange bands are. So yeah, the construction of the pyramid is quite confusing. But let's take a look around the surroundings before we actually go inside. From the entrance, just beyond the subtle remains of the mud brick enclosure wall, is the amazing Mastaba 17. This is a contemporary structure to the pyramid, although it appears to have been expanded once, and it housed several of Snefru's officials. On the south side is the remains of a satellite pyramid. Very little of it remains. There is a handful of masonry blocks, and the bedrock has been dug out to support what appears to be a pyramid of the same style as the major one. This satellite pyramid wasn't even excavated in its entirety, and is currently completely covered in sand. These pictures are from the 1960s. It's unusually close to the major pyramid, so it makes more sense to have been built for the dimensions of E2. Leading to the pyramid and its complex is a long causeway. It's partially uncovered today, but comes from the Nile. This causeway leads to a temple on the eastern side of the structure. It was discovered under a mountain of rubble by Flinders Petrie in 1891. It appears that the pyramid had collapsed onto it in antiquity, which helped preserve it, as the pyramid was used as a quarry from the times of Ramses all the way to the 1900s. He managed to discover it completely intact, and battled all of the debris he piled up on the sides that would occasionally collapse back down into the excavation. When he was done, he reburied the structure to prevent it from being quarried. It was then uncovered in this picture in 1920 by Alan Rowe. The temple was not connected to the pyramid, rather resting up against it. You can see here the back wall of the temple where it rests against a smooth casing stone of the E3 layer. It has no inscriptions and appears as though no paving stones were even inserting into the floor, which we can assume was one of the last steps, so it appears to me that something happened at the very end of construction that caused it to be abandoned. Surrounding the pyramid are a variety of stone sarcophagi. These had come from various burials underground within the complex and the surrounding area. Most of these are from the 22nd dynasty, like the carved one here, but some are also Old Kingdom. A strange feature on the east side of the structure is an indent of only about an inch or 2 on the uppermost parts of E2. Some believe this was for a ramp, but I'm under the impression that it's a false door, like those that would have covered a ka chamber in a mastaba. The approachway seems to point directly at it, and Flinders Petrie wondered if for E2, perhaps the top few layers were built in the form of a mastaba and contained a hidden ka chamber. The last unusual feature of the outside of the pyramid is these large cavities. You might assume that these were just collapsed during an earthquake, but they were actually quarried very recently by locals to encourage bats to nest there. Their guano is used as a valuable fertilizer. If you get in close, you can see bats in this image. Each of the few dozen small dots is a bat, and you will see many more of them when I bring you inside. As you ascend the pile of rubble and the wooden stairs to the entranceway, you can get close up to the casing stones and see that it really was a smooth-sided pyramid at one point. We can see the slope that the outer layers once had, and they are exactly the same as the top of the bent pyramid and of the red pyramid. You can also see that the casing stones are laid flat, not at an angle like E1 and 2 or the bent pyramid, indicating that this part was done after the bent pyramid and either before or during the red one. Before we go inside, there should be one more feature on the outside that I was not able to find. The reason we know about the internals of this pyramid is because Gerald Avery Wainwright tunneled into it. I wanted to show you that tunnel, but was not able to figure out where it was. I assume it's somewhere down in the E3 section due to it being reported that he went through all 9 layers, so perhaps it's currently covered in debris. I thought this 2-course hole might be it, but you can see it in older sketches, so I really don't know where he tunneled. While there are reports of this pyramid from as far back as the Middle Ages, the first modern-ish explorer to examine the pyramid was, of course, Howard Weiss and John Shea Perring, who visited the pyramids in 1839. They measured the pyramid and recognized the layer design, but were not able to locate its entrance. Because of this, we get this typical Perring-style drawing, but without any mention of internal structure. The pyramid was first entered by French explorer Sir Gaston Maspero in 1882, so 1 year before this picture of him was taken. It's a long passageway, but is surprisingly tall compared to other pyramids. The smooth stones are from the E3 construction. When you reach E2, there is an obvious transition with a second door configuration. You can see holes in both sides of the wall which acted as a pivot, and the space above would have received the door. This is a fairly common pyramid design. As you descend further down, the corridor becomes more and more rounded. This is due to salt damage, which has soaked through the rock and caused the outer faces to chip away. Maspero said this corridor was half full of chips when he explored it. There is a pit dug in the corridor before the antechamber, very similar to the one in the red pyramid, but much deeper. It's currently filled in. This was likely to catch rain and debris, so that it did not enter the antechamber. Because the corridor is limestone, which is compressed seabed, where the stones have broken, they have revealed a number of fossils. Here you can see the spiral pattern of some kind of shell and the imprint of a leaf. At the bottom of the corridor, you will enter the first small antechamber, which is only about the size of a small closet, and has a flat roof spanned by large beams. It was discovered in 1998 that the red pyramid and this one have way more in common than once thought. You may not think it has much in common with the majestic high-vaulted ceilings of the red pyramid, but those high ceilings actually do exist in the Meidum pyramid. They've just been covered with these flat beams, which to the ancients would probably have been more impressive. If you visit today, you may notice these occasional drill holes like this one. These were drilled to shove a fiber optic camera into the space and get our first look at them. Being sealed completely, these have had a lot less salt damage than the main structures and show an extraordinary understanding of engineering. Here, you can see a stone in the first room that has been wired together to prevent it from just flaking off due to the excessive and continuous salt damage. You can tell how much of the walls have flaked away in the past few thousand years because of where the floor once stood. Look at this obvious mark along the floor. You can tell that about 3 or 4 inches of the masonry has fallen away. On the other side, there is a modern piece of glass embedded into the masonry. I have no idea when this was put there or what purpose it served. If you know, please let me know. It's located about where the arrow is. Moving forward, there is a short corridor leading to the second chamber, offset from the others the same as the red pyramid. This one also has a relieving chamber above it, so if the ceiling beams were not there, it'd look very similar to the red one, just smaller. At the end of the second chamber, much like in the red pyramid, we must go up to get to what's known as the burial chamber. In this pyramid, that takes the form of a completely vertical shaft, which in the modern day is ascended by a tight spiral staircase. The stairs in the picture are modern, but the wooden beams are thousands of years old, and probably original to the pyramid. There are obvious channels where ropes were meant to go, similar to the portcullis mechanism in the Great Pyramid. Keith Hamilton proposes a block was lowered into place like this, but no, that stone would be huge. My guess is it was actually 2 stones. The first was just lowered into place and allow the workers to escape, while a second, smaller stone was lowered then behind them and sealed it. When going up the staircase, you'll notice a single stone missing from the wall on the north side, which will allow you to actually see the smallest relieving space, which almost reminds me of the window in the chimney of the bent pyramid. It's an interesting space to be sure, but it does come with the normal trash you now find in modern Egypt. I'm not sure about the wood, but I believe it is also modern. Finally, at the top of the shaft, you will come to the burial chamber. This is very strange to me because while the corridors in the antechamber have fairly regular masonry, look at the absolute clusterfuck of the burial chamber. In this single image, we have 3 separate places where masonry appears to have been repaired. It also seems like the corbels may not have actually been broken by stress or salt, but on purpose, perhaps to smooth the walls slightly. Notice that from this angle, you can see the bottom of the corbel is clearly roughly broken, but above it there appears to be a smooth line, which continues along many stones. Perhaps they were trying to make a smooth triangular roof? I actually have a theory about the repairs. There was a coffin found here, at least the remains of one, but it was wooden and likely came from the 22nd dynasty, so it was invasive. I think the majority of what I'd call repairs were actually done at this time, as well as maybe some of the log holes. We have to remember that the pyramid was not just sealed and then left for us, but thousands of years of people lived their lives around it, and it seems one of them commissioned a renovation of the Meidum for their burial. Here you can see the work of looters. The floor has been dug up looking for secrets underneath, like with many pyramids, as well as a robber's exploration of the south wall. They only removed a single stone and cut through the sides of another. Behind it, there was more masonry, which they seem to have probed both sides of and determined that there was nothing else there. In the red pyramid, I wondered if perhaps they should have looked higher at the black stone that seemed to be removable, and I see a very similar stone right here. However, I do not believe that there is a hidden chamber, as its mortar seems to have been removed, and I can't quite tell if it's load-bearing or not. It seems to me someone already tried to take the stone out and it didn't budge. These stones are also much smaller than those in the red pyramid. If this were a single-course tunnel, it'd be a very tight squeeze. Strangely, the last corbel of the north wall appears recessed slightly. This seems to be by design, as the relieving chamber shows the same thing, though I'm really not sure why. This wall has been drilled into, so we know there is nothing behind it. Here we can see a variety of ancient logs that are embedded in the masonry, as well as others that had positions cut for them. In my opinion, the embedded logs are obviously original, and perhaps the square holes were cut by whomever renovated the space, perhaps to get the wooden sarcophagus or mummy board up the shaft. There are also these thin bars spanning the third corbel down on both ends of the chamber. I believe these are modern and made of iron, but I was not able to figure out who put them there or why. So, what does all of this mean? What is this place? The mainstream belief is that this was Snefru's first attempt at building a pyramid. It was discovered to be unstable or collapsed and was abandoned, and they moved on to building the bent pyramid. But when that started showing signs of problems, the red pyramid was constructed. How can I put this delicately? The current understanding is complete bullshit. I know that saying a pyramid is not a tomb would usually lump me into a very unscientific crowd. But this is not based on lack of evidence for it being a tomb. I'm a scientist. I know that's not evidence. I actually have strong evidence that it is specifically not a tomb. Let me first show 2 enormous flaws with the accepted theory. First, the workers' marks on the stones show very clearly that both pyramids were being constructed at the same time. The Meidum pyramid had not been rejected first, then the bent pyramid was started. They were actively being built together. Furthermore, it seems work was abandoned at the Meidum pyramid in the very late stages. Then almost immediately the red pyramid was started. It seems very clear that Snefru was always hell-bent on having two pyramids. Obviously only one of them was intended to be his tomb, which I believe was the bent one. So what was the purpose of the secondary pyramid at Meidum? And when it collapsed, why was it so important that they immediately start making a copy? The fact that the red pyramid has the same layout and was started when the Meidum pyramid collapsed indicate that they were meant for the same purpose, which was not a tomb since he already had one. Now, in my opinion, this is fairly strong argument by itself, but there is one more thing that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt to me that this was never intended to be a tomb. Say this was a tomb, and Snefru died, and you're carrying his sarcophagus or mummy board down into the structure. What's the plan at this vertical shaft that's not wide enough to raise a mummy? Tip him? I don't think anybody really thought this part through. Snefru's builders would have no intention of tipping their god king 90 degrees to put him into his tomb. So what do I think it is? Remember when I said that Flinders Petrie thought this indent was likely a false door and there may still be a hidden Ka chamber? I don't think there is a Ka chamber. I think the entire pyramid is the Ka chamber. That's why when it collapsed, the quarry for the bent pyramid was outputting a surplus of stone, so they started the replacement there. The Ka is sort of analogous to the soul, and in a gross oversimplification, you can think of the statue as giving it an entity to attach to. A statue, more importantly, can be twisted and turned however the workers need to, so that's what I think was actually intended to be placed in the upper chamber. When it collapsed right at the end of building, the red pyramid was constructed for this purpose, explaining why it has nearly identical layout and is likewise missing certain elements usually associated with tombs. I think the Meidum pyramid was left empty, abandoned until the new kingdom began using it again, invasively burying a wooden coffin in the Ka chamber, and if they were still there, sealing the portcullis behind them. Thank you for listening. The next videos will finish up exploring Snefru with his final two pyramids, the bent one and its satellite. Respectfully discuss my theory or comment your own, and subscribe if you wish to continue to explore the enigmas of our distant ancestors with me.